Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for an exploration into the recent work of the master of horror himself, Stephen King. We're talking about his 2024 collection of short stories and novellas, You Like It Darker. And you tasked us with digging through, all the critical consensus, the fan discussions, even the audio notes, to answer the really big question here. Does this collection see King return to that powerful classic form we've all been craving? What nuggets of insight are in these tales, and which stories stand tall, and which ones maybe fall a little flat? That's our mission for this deep dive.
And we can start with the overall assessment because the immediate takeaway is, well, it's exceptionally strong. If you, like a lot of constant readers, were maybe left feeling a little underserved by his last collection, If It Bleeds, the consensus is that You Like It Darker is just a far more cohesive and compelling experience.
The reviews are consistently glowing, right? I mean, we're seeing a flood of 5 out of 5 stars from major outlets. But what's really interesting is this one point that just keeps coming up, that King, he benefits immensely from the constraints of shorter fiction.
Exactly. Critics note that when the, let's face it, prolific author is forced into word economy, it just cuts out that occasional tendency he has, for excessive backstory or these kind of meandering subplots. It makes every sentence count. The sources all agree this proves King, when he's constrained, still more than has it. This feels like vintage King, back in fighting shape, ready to disturb your sleep.
Okay, let's unpack that, the core thematic material. Because while we call him the master of horror, this collection is really described as a huge mixed bag. You've got supernatural, sci-fi, dark crime, drama, even moments of sharp humor. He's covering the whole spectrum here.
And that variety is, it's always been King's strength. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the collection is really unified by these serious, kind of heavy philosophical undercurrents. What's fascinating is how openly King's advancing age is bleeding into his writing. The overwhelming themes are, well, impending mortality, the nature of legacy, and just sort of coming to terms with the end of the narrative.
So, if it's less about, say, the classic boogeyman or killer cars, does that mean he's sacrificing jump scares for just pure philosophy? Or does he manage to weave them together?
Oh, he absolutely does both. But the focus shifts. The terror is rooted less in the external monster and more in the human condition and the all-too-human monsters we find along the way. And the sources universally agree. These human monsters are by far the worst kind. They're your neighbors, your family, or just, ordinary people put under extreme pressure.
And that's his technique, right? Using these plain old ordinary folks. That's what makes the chaos so deeply impactful. We can relate to the janitor or the Vietnam vet, which means we internalize the horror way faster than if it were just some epic battle of good versus evil.
Precisely. And beyond mortality and human evil, you also see those constant threads King loves to pull on. The role of sheer luck versus inescapable destiny, and the wonderfully pliable nature of reality itself. These characters aren't just running from a creature, they're grappling with fate.
Speaking of grappling with fate, let's jump straight to the heavy hitters. The critical opinion really seems to agree that the strongest stories are the novellas. They give King that space he needs to build that intense, sustained tension.
The consensus favorites are definitely the longer works. And we have to start with Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream.
This one is huge. The audiobook is 68 chapters long. The setup is just classic psychological King. Danny, a humble janitor, has this crystal clear, first time ever psychic flash about where a body is buried. He reports it anonymously, and then his whole simple life just completely unravels.
And what makes this story a true nail-biter is how he executes the paranoia. It's not just about hiding. It's about this bureaucratic, slow-motion persecution. The story is just a masterful, tense thriller, and it perfectly illustrates that axiom that no good deed goes unpunished. Critics called it one of the wildest stories King has written because you're just watching this genuinely good person get systematically destroyed by the very system he tried to help.
Then you have The Dreamers, which sounds like a total throwback to classic cosmic dread, a mix of sci-fi and pure horror.
This is a story that delivers on the promise of the book's title. It follows a down-on-his-luck Vietnam vet who answers this vaguely worded job ad, and he discovers the experiment he joins goes hideously awry. What's really fascinating here is the context. King himself cited H.P. Lovecraft's Beyond the Wall of Sleep as an inspiration.
So we're talking Lovecraftian cosmic horror. For anyone unfamiliar, what does that really mean in this context?
It means the terror isn't about, physical injury. It's about the crushing realization that human experience is just utterly meaningless. in the face of these vast, indifferent, and totally incomprehensible forces that live outside our reality. One reviewer even called it an updated From Beyond. King's own take on it was that it was so creepy he couldn't think about it at night.
And the fan consensus backs that up.
Yeah.
I saw it being compared to his own iconic smaller works like 1408 and The Library Policeman. I mean, that story alone sounds like a strong reason to get the collection.
Absolutely. It's a brilliant piece of sustained dread. And moving on, we have the sequel that fans have been waiting decades for, Rattlesnakes.
This is a direct sequel to Cujo, isn't it? Which is just astonishing because that novel came out in, what, 1981?
It is. It's set 40 years later, and it follows Vic Trenton. He's now aging and, this grief-stricken widower who lost his wife and son in the original tragedy. Vic inherits a remote house on Rattlesnake Bay, and his neighbor is this eccentric woman who just endlessly pushes an empty pram. The ghosts of the twins she lost decades ago to rattlesnakes.
Wow. Revisiting those deep, traumatic, emotional scars. That's a really interesting choice for him. It shows that some fictional wounds just never heal.
And that's the core of it. It is a freaky ghost story, but its purpose is really sociological. It uses that supernatural framework to focus squarely on this profound, endless human grief. Specifically, how surviving parents deal with the lumpy, painful scar tissue that comes from losing a child. It's mature King blending genuine sadness with the slow burn terror.
And finally, we close the collection with a story that gives us a crucial emotional counterpoint, The Answer Man.
This story gives you a much-needed lift after all that darkness. It follows an attorney who, at various stressful, pivotal moments in his life, he encounters the Answer Man, a seemingly mystical helper who gives him exactly the information he needs.
So it tackles that age-old argument about prescience, right? If you knew the future, would you be happier or just sort of paralyzed?
Exactly. It raises the question of whether knowing the plot ahead of time improves your life or, the struggle and the ignorance are necessary for a fulfilling existence. And because it provides hope and introspection instead of dread, it was widely praised for leaving the reader with a warm feeling. A beautiful contrast to the darkness that came before.
Okay, let's unpack this next segment and move to the shorter works, which are incredibly diverse. Starting with Onslaught and Road, which I understand is an outright literary nod to another great writer.
Yes, this is King paying direct, very clear tribute to the Southern Gothic master, Flannery O'Connor, specifically her short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. And it's just this horrifying, brief depiction of roadside mayhem after a family's car breaks down.
And the power, even though it's so short, comes from the character writing. One source noted that it delivers wonderful, if brief, studies in character. It challenges stereotypes and shows that not every man of the house is brave, and not every old person is weak.
Then you have The Turbulence Expert, which has a genuinely fresh, high-concept premise. It explores what would happen if obsessive-compulsive disorder, a common human affliction, wasn't actually a neurosis, but something necessary to keep the structural integrity of the world in order, to keep it in one piece.
That blending of the intensely ordinary, like OCD, with cosmic responsibility, that is peak King. It connects a personal battle to a universal threat and makes the whole world seem fragile.
It does, and that's why it was called Fresh and Classic King. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Willie the Weirdo. Denny. So initially, some readers were confused. They thought it was just a simple, if dark, story about a death-obsessed boy and his grandfather who tells stories.
But there's a deeper, much more unsettling twist hidden in the text.
Oh yeah, the grandfather who tells these stories that span centuries is actually transferring his soul or his mind into Willie's body when he dies. The giveaway, as some very keen readers pointed out, is Willie performing his grandfather's signature gesture. He touches his upper lip, right after the transition. That physical tick is the definitive proof that the entity survived. It makes the story about parasitic immortality, not simple grief.
So the specific physical detail is the breadcrumb, the clue that validates the twist. Though we should mention a few readers felt that plot device was maybe a little weak, or a recycle of his earlier story, Grandma. So a definite mixed reaction on that one.
We also have The Fifth Step, a short story that relies entirely on psychological discomfort. It involves an odd stranger using another stranger as a kind of father confessor to complete the fifth step of the Alcoholics Anonymous program.
And for anyone unfamiliar with the 12-step program, that fifth step it's a critical one.
Absolutely. The fifth step is where you confess the exact nature of your wrongs to God, to yourself, and to another human being. And in this story, that human being is a total stranger in a park. The awkwardness, the moral burden, and then the kicker at the end. It's pure, uncomfortable King. Some called it the scariest slow burn story and the most believable scenario in the whole book.
And just for a quick palate cleanser before we get to the critiques, there's Lori.
Okay.
This one is described as genuinely heartwarming, not scary. A poignant story about how a border collie helps a man heal while he's just drowning in grief. It shows King is still capable of real tenderness amidst all the horror.
Now, to provide a balanced view, not every story landed perfectly. The first story in the book, Two Talented Bastards, was called a total letdown by some critics. It examines whether talent is a gift of nature or something more supernatural, and the critique was basically that the premise was stronger than the execution.
And Finn, the story about a young Irishman with impossibly bad luck, that one faced a lot of criticism. Reviewers often called it a dud. They felt it was a crime thriller that never got around to thrilling anyone.
Oh, yeah.
It just lacked that supernatural element that really makes King's crime work shine.
There were even technical critiques in Finn about the language. Some reviewers noted these confusing Americanisms like using gasoline instead of petrol, which just detracted from the Irish setting. It kind of broke the spell of the narrative.
And finally, we have Red Screen, a sci-fi humor piece about nagging wives. Reviewers seem to agree this was maybe the weakest entry overall, mostly because it felt too slight, incomplete, like it needed a few more pages to really deliver on its dark comedic premise. It was more setup than payoff.
So what does this all mean when we synthesize the whole collection? Well, despite those couple of stories that missed the mark, and it's usually due to execution, not the concept.
Yeah.
Darker is undeniably a very, very strong collection. The novellas are just excellent, and they prove King is back in form, mastering that crucial word economy you need for short fiction.
I agree completely. What defined it for me was the thematic maturity.
Yeah.
It moved beyond the easy scares. It focused so heavily on these deep human anxieties like grief, destiny, and the inevitability of mortality. It feels like a reflection on a life lived, just, filtered through a dark supernatural lens.
And if you choose the audio route for your deep dive, we have to reiterate the value of that experience. The audio version is read primarily by the highly praised narrator Will Patton, and his performance was described as so good it made the horror cringe in the daytime. That level of immersion just enhances the dread.
King clearly spent a lot of time thinking about prescience in this collection, whether it's through the accidental, terrifying dreams of Danny Coughlin or the mystical, controlled assistance in The Answer Man. The line between control and chaos is just constantly blurred. So, here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on. If you suddenly had a first-time crystal-clear psychic flash like Danny Coughlin, would you act on that knowledge? Knowing that King has shown through his narrative that no good deed might go unpunished, what does his consistent focus on the battle between sheer luck and predetermined destiny suggest about how much control we actually have over the plot of our own lives, and which ending we're all walking toward? Something to think about the next time fate taps you on the shoulder.